What's all the shouting?
The Scopes trial was a legal battle between John T. Scopes and the state of Tennessee in regards to Tennessee's Butler Act. The Butler Act prevented the teaching of evolution in state-funded schools. During the case, William Jennings Bryan offered to prosecute for the state of Tennessee, while Clarence Darrow offered to provide defense for John Scopes. The trial eventually would end with John Scopes being convicted, fined $100, but the conviction was overturned on a technicality. What's really interesting and important with this trial is the fact that it brought to the forefront in a very public manner the debate between evolution and the Bible. The big thing with this is that it was an encapsulation of the fundamentalism versus modernism controversy. Essentially, modernism is pushing that the Bible has errors, that it's not divinely inspired, that a lot of the miraculous events within the Bible do not take place. Whereas fundamentalism is a literal reading of the Bible, that everything in the Bible did happen the way it did, and that the Bible is God-inspired, written by man. The trial itself is not the end-all be-all or the beginning of the controversy, but it helps to encapsulate what's going on at that time, which can also be seen now in modern times. For example, a lot of evolutionists now will say that all creatures are descended from one organism, whereas the Bible says all kinds were created of their own kind. These questions were items that were brought up during the trial. Now, a lot more liberal theologies will try to marry up evolution and the creation story, saying that the days were thousands, millions of years, whereas the fundamentalists will sit there and say, no, these were just 6 days. The God of creation can say what he wants and everything will show up the way he says it. Which, and again, is a very general observation of the controversy. The trial itself helped to bring about the teaching of evolution in state schools, as well as other cases such as in Arkansas. A similar case did occur that helped to strike down the ban on evolution and allow it to become more of a topic in sciences in school. In the long run, though, the case, as I said, does have some modern equivalencies comparing the more traditional religious views versus the more liberal theologies. Case in point would be recent schisms in certain churches about the acts acts of homosexuals in relationships being condoned by certain churches or certain sects within a denomination, while the more traditional will still say that marriage is between one man and one woman. In the long run, the Scopes trial is really the crux of modernism introducing into public schools by having academic freedom and allowing for, academic thought and pursuing that information to its natural conclusion by stymieing any real intellectual curiosity of a student. However, on the flip side, we see that with the push of fundamentalism and religious viewpoints out of schools from this starting point, there has been a gradual decline in public religious expression up until fairly recently, where it started to come back. It's difficult to really encapsulate the fundamentalism versus modernism controversy when looking at it specifically through the Scopes monkey trial. But it does give an example of how broad and how quickly things developed that became so important on both sides of the argument, with liberal theology developing its own criteria, its own way of thinking, and fundamentalism really developing into the more traditional view. Again, being very difficult to really encapsulate that in this video. It is interesting to see that even back in the 1920s, there were a lot of controversies that started developing that we still see today with creation versus evolution, traditional versus the more liberal theologies in the church right now, and seeing that this is probably something that is always going to be a part of our culture, being that we are a free people that can decide and worship how we feel we want to.